Hi, this is Stephanie Anderson, Head of Reader Services at Darien Library. On February 28, 2015, we invited two authors to present their books to a packed house of fans. Phil Klay, author of Redeployment, which won the 2014 National Book Award for Fiction, and Emily Gray Tedrowe, author of her second novel, Blue Stars, which dealt with the home front. Both authors try to make sense of the terrible and heartbreaking stories of war. One soldier fighting for his life, another just returned in the arms of his daughter. They both feel these are stories that need to be told.
I think for the most part, a lot of the vets that I've met, they're glad that people are writing, not just me, but there's a lot of vets writing about what we've been through. And it's hard, but it's also important. You come back to a country that doesn't really always feel like it's paying attention to the wars. And you want people to be engaged. You want people thinking about what that experience means. The soldier who's issuing himself orders, it's us. It's the elected leaders that we as American citizens put in office. If we're apathetic about the wars, and if we don't hold our elected leaders accountable, and if we don't spend our time thinking about what those wars mean, then that's going to be reflected in policy and then reflected in the experiences and lives of the men and women that we send overseas. Stakes are really high.
To me, writing a home front novel means keeping the focus on families, women, the people who are living the day-to-day experience of what it's like to have a loved one away at war. And whether that means what it's like to buy your child a Hug a Hero doll, or what it's like when your paycheck doesn't really cover everything you need, but you're the only one there to cope with it. I really wanted to sort of think about what life is like at home during the war.
Oh my God!
Okay, so tonight's program with Emily Gray Tedrowe and Phil Klay will have two parts. Sorry, both of their names are not what you would think. So unless I just said them right. First, Emily and Phil are going to be in conversation with one another right here. And then after that, we will open it up for questions from the audience, so start thinking. Phil Klay is the author of Redeployment, a collection of short stories which you may have heard won the National Book Award for Fiction last year. He is a graduate of Dartmouth College and a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. He served in Iraq's Anbar province from January 2007 to February 2008 as a public affairs officer. After being discharged, he went to Hunter College and received an MFA. He was also named last year a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree, so I'm not at all jealous, don't worry about it. Redeployment, the book, if you have not read it, takes readers to the front lines of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, asking us to understand what happened there and what happened to the soldiers who returned. Interwoven with themes of brutality and faith, guilt and fear, helplessness and survival, the characters in these stories struggle to make meaning out of chaos. Emily is the author of Blue Stars, which just came out a couple weeks ago. Happy birthday to your book. And she also, her first book, which is called Commuters. Commuters was named the best new paperback by Entertainment Weekly and was also an Indie Next notable pick as well as a Target breakout book. Blue Stars, her new book, explores the bonds of family and the limits of fidelity. The story of two women changed by war and by each other, this riveting novel is a graceful and gritty portrayal of life on the home front in the 21st century. So as you can see, both authors are approaching the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but from very different angles and with very different points of view. So as you can imagine, we are more than delighted to have these authors with us this evening. We're hoping to hear them talk about their books and, anything else.
Okay.
Okay.
I want to say thank you to all of you guys for being here. I mean, to come out on a cold February day is amazing. I want to thank Phil. It's such an honor to read with you and get to talk to you. And most of all, I want to thank Alan Gray. I don't know where he is, lurking in the back somewhere. You may or may not know that that's my dad, the director of the library. And I want to say that to me it's pretty amazing because not only does he manage to be my biggest fan, but somehow he kind of helped me maybe believe that it wasn't just nepotism that allowed me to come and talk to all of you guys today. So I'm happy to be here.
I don't think it was. I'm really thrilled to be talking to you.
Yeah.
And thrilled to be here. This is a beautiful library. Oh my
Yeah.
God. So
Yeah.
yeah,
All
should we
right.
talk about
I would like to. I have a question for you.
Okay.
Okay, so I was reading your stories, and I've read the book twice now. And this second time as I was reading it, it occurred to me that these stories are also different. They approach Iraq and the war, different backgrounds. And I was curious about which of these stories was the hardest for you to write, and which was the easiest?
They were all hard in different ways, you know, and it's strange because some of the stories that you might think were sort of a relief. Like, for example, there's a story in the middle of the collection called "Money as a Weapon System,"
Right.
which is a satirical comic story about the Reconstruction effort, and it's told from the perspective of a Foreign Service officer who's in 2008 trying to do something useful and dealing with the aftermath of a lot of the policies, particularly from early on in the war. And it's a more comic story. It's light. Readers have often told me it was a little bit of a respite because some of the stories are a little dark.
You don't say.
Yeah. And there were parts of it that I did enjoy writing a lot. But for that story, doing the research was just an exercise in getting really, really angry all the time. Because, I was going through, I read a memoir by somebody called We Meant Well by Peter Van Buren that managed a provincial reconstruction team. And I also went through a lot of Special Inspector General for Iraq. Yeah, all right.
Yep.
Here we go. This better, okay.
Okay.
Also went through a lot of Special Inspector General for Iraq reconstruction reports, including a book-length one called Hard Lessons. And it was just me going, we did that. And we did that too.
Right.
And this was stupid and avoidable. And there were people who knew better who were ignored. And it's not, it's easy to chalk a lot of things up to, incompetence and war is hell and whatever. But no, bad policies result in people getting killed. Yeah. And so has produced some of the funniest books ever written. Sure. But doing the research for that was just enraging. So there were things like that. There were stories that were on a technical level really I didn't know how to write, and so I'm reading books like I'm reading Nathan Englander's short stories and being like, how does he structure this? It shouldn't work because I want to steal his.
Right.
And then there were just stories that involve spending time in dark places. So I think every story had its own peculiar challenges. I wanted to ask you about that. Now, so you come from, there are a lot of military people in your family.
That's true.
And you have a brother who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. And you chose to write about service members who get injured.
Right.
Now, when I know some of my family members, when myself or my brothers were overseas, they didn't want to read about anything like that. Were you doing that sort of research at the time, or was it afterwards that you started working your way into this emotional space, and how did you get there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, can you hear me? Is this good in the mic? I think that, of course, during the time that my brother was deployed, I didn't want to read anything about war. I mean, I especially didn't want to read headline news. I tried to stay away from the internet at times. I was hungry for fiction. I wanted to sort of be moved and have sort of some deep thinking about war, but I just couldn't, I think for me it was a pure 7 months of reading total escapist pleasures. And it wasn't until after he came back and we were so glad and relieved and rejoiced that I started thinking about war, and I started thinking about kind of how deeply it affected me being home, and what it was like for other women. So that's what kicked me into thinking about some of the things I had maybe been afraid to really go to before, like those darker places. I mean, when I write about some of my characters getting injured in the war, I was imagining it almost for the first time, what it would be like, because I hadn't let myself go there during the time that my brother was deployed. So I really needed the space afterwards to kind of, I don't know, what's that quote that, I think it's Wordsworth, you know, great emotion recollected in tranquility or something like that. And that I needed that space, I needed the rest, I needed to kind of feel more, I don't know, past the events themselves, to be able to want to write about them, to imagine them. Yeah.
Right, I felt exactly the same way. I think the process of writing the book, if you'd asked me about the Iraq War right when I came home, I would have had a lot more certain, sure answers for you in 2008 than I do now, which is a good thing. I think that the process of writing the book really changed a lot of the ways that I felt about, not just about war, but all the issues that circle around war, and also about America itself.
Yeah, that makes me think about, okay, so here's a question. What was it like for you as a writer and a reader to be over in Iraq? What did you read while you were there? What did you want to read? What felt good to read, and what did you stay away from?
I didn't stay away from things that were that maybe I should have. Like, I read Don Quixote when I was in Iraq. And I'm like, I read Gravity's Rainbow while I was in Iraq, like a novel about entropy in the midst of, and about World War II. I read Amy Hempel's short stories. I love Amy Hempel. Fantastic. And I read Anthony Powell's Dance to the Music of Time, which was, so a friend of mine sent me it's this amazing 12-novel series.
I don't think I've literally ever met anyone who's read that before.
You just need to start it, and then you'll finish. It's
okay.
Really, it's an absolute pleasure.
I mean, it takes up like an entire shelf in the bookstore, doesn't it? It's really long.
They're short novels.
Yeah.
So a friend of mine had sent me the first 3, and he said he had a friend who'd been a correspondent in Serbia who had read them just to have this sort of English novel manners that would be something totally divorced from war. And that's why he sent it to me. So you can, step into English society in the 1920s and be totally divorced from war. Except I kept reading, and by the time you get to book 7, World War II starts.
Right.
So it always catches up with you. You can't escape. But it was great. It was fantastic. What books were you reading as you were writing this? What were you going to? I mean, there's a lot of books embedded in the book naturally because Ellen is a literature professor.
Right.
And I have questions about that later. But, and probably, I'm guessing Edith Wharton was
Edith
somebody?
Wharton was somebody I read during the research. So one of the main characters, there's 2 women who are my main characters in the novel, and one of them is a literature professor at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and she is an Edith Wharton specialist. And a lot of people have asked me, were you an Edith Wharton specialist? Did you give it to her because it has this deep thematic connection to the Iraq War? And frankly, I just wanted to give her something that I'm interested in and wanted to read also. So of course, I just handed her Edith Wharton, and then of course, as you read Edith Wharton, she's incredibly imbued with war. I mean, she was, in Paris during World War I, and wrote a ton of actual war fiction, both about families and about soldiers. And it's not really what we know of Edith Wharton, but it's a huge part of her career. So it was a strange, sort of, I don't know, like ESP that I had when I gave her that. And one of the novels that I read was, I searched out this lesser-known Edith Wharton novel called A Son at the Front. And I read it because it's all about the home front. It's set in Paris during World War I. And it's really all about the terrified families and expats and shopkeepers and doctors who were there, really just kind of just several miles from where the front lines were, and yet they were carrying on society and living and trying to experience the war, you know, while they weren't there, while their loved ones were there. And it was incredibly, I think it was the first piece of fiction I read that really made me feel feelings that I had had during my brother's Iraq deployment, which is so amazing, right? That a book written over 100 years ago can be so exact about your emotions. And so that was a key book for me, and I read it several times while I was writing this novel. I wanted to stay close to it, not just because my character was a professor and a specialist in her work, but because I felt like it had something to do with what I myself was writing. Yeah.
There's also a mention, so Ellen writes these letters.
Right.
And even before he goes overseas, just this long letter trying to convince him not to
Right.
go into the military. And she's got this, you know, she's anti-war, this is a very separate world from what her ward is about to embark on. And she references in one of the letters Chekhov's short story, The Huntsman, which is a great short story. I love it. And it struck me, so what happens in The Huntsman is these characters sort of appear on stage almost like it's in a play. And then slowly these characters are kind of reveals that happen very quickly in a short story.
It's only a few pages.
Yeah.
And it's really short.
Where it moves from characters existing as kind of iconic types almost to your expectations about them being complicated and twisted until all of a sudden you're deeply invested in this interpersonal tension between the two of them.
Right.
And it struck me that in a way that's kind of what happens with, in your book, you know, there's Ellen's political understanding of the military and what this choice is, and her politics in regards to Iraq. And then as her ward is going through it, her relationship to it is continually complicated until she's all of a sudden in a position of making decisions. Not decisions of broad policy, but decisions that are related to military life, medical care. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that and the relation of politics to the inner lives of the characters and how they connect in your book.
First of all, I love everything you just said about The Huntsman. I hadn't made that connection, but I really love thinking about it that way. I mean, and so I think I'm so glad you brought up politics. I wanted to talk about how sometimes in fiction, politics is a tricky subject matter, and oftentimes as writers, especially these days, we're sort of maybe urged to not be political or to not engage with politics, and but war is political, and you know we can't escape that. And so I think I have two characters who are on vastly different sides of the politics of the Iraq War. One, Ellen, who's sort of always been kind of anti-war, just a knee-jerk reaction to it. And the other, Lacey, who's like a proud military wife, a proud army wife, who absolutely, you know, believes that Iraq was a justified war. And so I have each of the characters go into this novel thinking that they don't have any questions or ambiguity whatsoever. And I wanted to complicate that for them immensely over the course of the book. And it sort of struck me what you just said about how you would have been a lot more clear on Iraq in 2008 than you are now. And I think that's so great. I mean, I think the idea of becoming more confused about this essential experience shows, you know, shows how real it is, that it's okay for us to lose sight of all these certainties that we had about the war. And my characters slowly lose this sense of, wait, of really knowing what was true, what was right. And yeah, so that's what I think about that. But now it's me, and I have a question for you.
Okay.
Okay, so what I want to say first of all is I would like to know about the experience of winning the National Book Award for this collection of short stories. I mean, I think most of you can agree that this is, you know, such a singular and amazing and well-deserved honor. And I want to know what it did for you as a person, as a writer. How did you celebrate?
So you don't know that you're going to win
Right.
I really didn't know. I didn't even write a speech until that day when my wife asked me, who's there? Hi. If I'd written a speech. I was like, no, I'm not going to win. And she said, you have to write a speech.
Good idea.
So, you know, how I celebrated was there's like an after party after the National Book Awards. We were there, and then she was like, do you want to keep going out? I was like, I want to go to sleep. Like, I am overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I don't know, it was just fantastic. Talk to family and friends. I mean, that's, and you know, being around other people who are excited for you is one of the great pleasures of it. And then you know, when I wrote the book, you know, part of the reason I wrote the book is you especially with these wars, with the kind of disconnect that there is, I think, between, you know, the people who serve and the American citizens who, I mean, ultimately are responsible for our war policy, right? And, you know, military citizens as well. I felt when I came back, and I continued to feel, that there were things that were missing, that I wanted to reach out and talk to people about.
Missing in like the conversation.
In the conversation about war.
Mm-hmm.
And so and I understand that it's sometimes an unpleasant discussion because war is complicated and messy, and so to have that kind of, you know, validation and to be able to reach out to, you know, a bigger audience in that regard was really, I mean, amazing to me.
Did it make you feel like, yes, maybe we're ready for some of those harder conversations? And like you talked about, that sort of, you know, there's that divide that we often feel between military and civilians. And did you feel like this is a sign that maybe there's a greater acceptance of learning about the war and discussing it openly?
I hope so, and I'm also excited by just all the other books about war by veterans and civilians,
right,
that are coming out that I think are enriching our understanding of what the past decade plus has meant. So I was wondering, would you mind reading a little bit?
Sure.
You know, we've been talking about your characters.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from some of them.
Well, I would love to if you would also.
Okay.
Can we,
Yeah.
Okay. Is that all right with you guys? If we read a little? Okay. So let's see, I have a short snippet that I thought I would read. It's set at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, which is where the second half of my book is set. And it's not going to give anything away that I think isn't given away in the front flap material. So in this moment, the character Ellen is at the hospital, and she's waiting in agony to hear about Michael. Michael is her legal ward, not her adopted son, but close. She's waiting to hear about him after he's returned with really serious injuries, and they're being assessed. By the middle of the fourth day, Michael had been in surgical intensive care at Walter Reed. It had been determined that he would probably survive. Probably. Ellen didn't fully understand who had decided this, or by what measurement, since he was still in a coma, light coma, medically induced, and she couldn't see any change in the terrifying condition of his body. But the force of her gratitude kept her from asking too many questions. It was hard to form questions or thoughts here. Yellow curtains pressed closely around Michael and the other 4 men in their beds. Gowned personnel barreled in to work on him. Ellen roughly ushered aside. In new emergencies she couldn't detect. Digital shrieks came from monitors and equipment attached to unconscious Michael and the men behind the other curtains. The doctors didn't speak much to her, aside from brief updates that left her more confused than before. She got the sense they were hedging their bets. Yet it wasn't the doctors or the nurses that infuriated Ellen, or the many ranks of half-medical, half-military staff with their jargon and hurry and protocol. It was herself. Why couldn't she find a way to make herself heard here? Who was this woman, stammering and feeble, passively agreeing to procedures she wasn't clear on? Why did she let that one surgeon cut her off on the question of pain in a coma? She, who could lecture to the back of a 200-seat auditorium without a microphone, who could summarize salient points and counter-arguments at the drop of a hat, who was no stranger to the blazing self-importance of young men with highly advanced degrees. We can get back to saving the liver and spleen, or I can stand here discussing it with you. That's what the impatient surgeon had said when she fumbled around asking about pain levels. In response, what could anyone do but shut up and step aside? Mom, they constantly called her here. Too busy with life or death to learn names. Step outside now, Mom. Okay, Mom, we're gonna need you to... Your signature here, Mom, and here. Each time, the word burned her. But I'm not, she cried inwardly, afraid she was a fake or fraud, afraid this biological lack would doom his chances somehow. But she moved, she signed, she did what she was told. I'll stop there.
Fantastic.
Can we hear a little something?
Sure. So I'm just going to read a short bit from the first story. So this character he's an infantryman. He's just back home from Iraq, and he was in the Second Battle of Fallujah, which was very intense urban warfare. And this is his first weekend home. So here's an experience. Your wife takes you shopping in Wilmington. Last time you walked down a city street, your Marine on point went down the side of the road, checking ahead and scanning the roofs across from him. The Marine behind him checks the windows on the top levels of the buildings. The Marine behind him gets the windows a little lower, and so on down until your guys have the street level covered, and the Marine in back has the rear. In a city, there's a million places that can kill you from. It freaks you out at first, but you go through like you were trained, and it works. In Wilmington, you don't have a squad, you don't have a battle buddy, you don't even have a weapon. You startle 10 times checking for it, and it's not there. You're safe, so your alertness should be at white, but it's not. Instead, you're stuck in a American Eagle Outfitters. Your wife gives you some clothes to try on, and you walk into the tiny dressing room, you close the door, and you don't want to open it again. Outside, there are people walking around by the windows like it's no big deal. People who have no idea where Fallujah is, where 3 members of your platoon died. People who spent their whole lives at white. They'll never get even close to orange. You can't until the first time you're in a firefight or the first time an IED goes off that you missed. And you realize that everybody's life, everybody's, depends on you not fucking up. And you depend on them. Some guys go straight to red. They stay like that for a while, and then they crash, go down past white, down to whatever's lower than, I don't fucking care if I die. Most everybody else stays orange all the time. Here's what orange is. You don't see or hear like you used to. Your brain chemistry changes. You take in every piece of the environment, everything. I could spot a dime in the street 20 yards away. I had an antenna out that stretched down the block. It's hard to even remember exactly what that felt like. I think you just take in too much information to store, so you just forget. Free up brain space to take in everything about the next moment that might keep you alive. And then you forget that moment too, and focus on the next, and the next, and the next, for 7 months. So that's orange. And then you go shopping in Wilmington, unarmed, and you think you can get back down to white? It'll be a long fucking time before you get down to white. Thank you. Should we open it up for questions?
I don't know, is that the right time,
we,
Stephanie?
Should
Or
we do it? Or, yeah. Yeah.
I think we have one right in front here. Go ahead. Take us out.
Would you each please choose 1 or 2 of the real people who inspired one or more of your characters or situations you wrote about?
As soon as you asked the question, I thought, oh, I'm not going to be able to say anything, because I feel somewhat similarly. There's nobody that I really based my characters on. And then I thought that I think the real answer is me, that I'm the person that these characters are thinly veiled versions of. Even though I'm very different from each one of these 2 women in terms of age or background, etc. But I gave each woman, both the one who is fully in on the war and the one who's fully against it, I gave each of them rants that I'd had in my head. I gave them emotions I'd had. I gave them observations, experiences. I let them say a lot of the things that I didn't say. And so it was fun for me to make up people who were completely different from me and yet give them a lot of my own feelings.
how did you make the transition coming home and talking about your experiences, or not?
So, well, you know, my experiences were not as intense as some of the experiences in the book. I always talk about uncomfortable subject matter, so that, you know, I think that the thing with coming home that was strange. So the first time I came home, so I was in Iraq for 13 months, and when you do that, you get 2 weeks of leave in the middle of the deployment, and they'll send you anywhere in the world. You know, one Marine buddy of mine was really big into base jumping, and so he had his mother mail his base rig to Iraq, so that when his leave came, he could go to Switzerland and base jump the Eiger.
Because he didn't have enough scary things going on.
Right,
He
yeah,
needed to
exactly.
go, like, get some excitement.
I did not do that. I was like, I want to go home and see my family and friends in New York. It was great. Now, as I said, I was a staff officer. I wasn't super intense, but I certainly well aware of what was happening. I lived near a trauma facility where people were coming in from the battlefield. I'd seen a Marine die not that long before I went home. And then you fly right back to New York, and you're, walking down Madison Avenue in the summer, and there is zero sense that you're at war. And that is not just strange and it's not just that there's a sense of dislocation, but there's a real sense that there's something terribly wrong with this. And so there was that experience. And then there was the experience of, and I should say that, like, my friends and family were actually great in terms of talking about that. Then there's the experience of coming home the second time. Well, the second time I came home to Camp Lejeune. So I came home to a community where it did feel like we were at war, because everybody was either going to war, spouse of somebody at war, just back, training up for it. Because there are these little pockets of the country that are at war. So it was less when I came back, but at the end of my deployment, than it was when I left the military. And now I'm back in a society where there's no sense that we're at war. It's easy for me to forget about it, but I know people who are going over time and time again, right? And that's very strange. Because these wars we're still not done with our, involvement in these countries.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your short story, Prayer in the Furnace. And,
Thank you.
I was just wondering what the genesis for that story was, where it came from, because it really, in terms of a chaplain trying to discuss religion in an environment like war, extremely difficult, and trying to make a connection, I think, with Rodriguez, who's having his own issues, and I was just wondering where that story came from. It was a wonderful story.
Thank you. I'd read a couple of books about similar things that I drew on. I talked to some people about
There's a lot
their
of
experiences.
history and philosophy in that story,
Yeah.
isn't there?
And this is the other thing, is that I was educated by Jesuits in high school. That leaves a mark, a very good mark. So I have, a love for a lot of Catholic thought. I have a love for Catholic literature. Some of my favorite writers, Flannery O'Connor, Shusaku Endo, Graham Greene, people who really are interested in suffering and how human beings reconcile suffering and horror and sin with potential for grace and salvation, redemption, and what that sensibility would look like in that environment. And the other book that I was reading, you talk about the research that you do for a book. There's the research that you do for those details, and then there's the kind of emotional research, and one of those was Georges Bernanos' Diary of a Country Priest, which is a beautiful, brilliant novel that deals with all the kinds of moral issues that you find in war, just happens to be set among, like, the bourgeoisie in the French countryside. And yet is profound, and that was a really important book for me when I was writing writing Prayer in the Furnace.
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm really enjoying this. I have a question for you both. You talk about a change in your experience before you write the book. And I believe you have changes before and after writing the book. Could you talk about that?
So let me just understand. So changes.
You changed?
Did I change before I?
Before and after?
Absolutely. Writing this book changed me, and I think Phil was talking earlier about how we don't. It's hard to have conversations about war and feelings about it. It can be tricky. It can be loaded. It can be hard. And writing this book broke open for me a lot of thinking and feeling about this particular war and about war in general that I hadn't really been able to even talk to myself about. And it allowed me to sort of get into this conversation. I do think we're having a great conversation in the fiction world in particular right now, with a lot of novels and stories and coming out that are about this particular war. So I think I was changed by kind of saying, yes, I have the authority to write about this. I was part of it, even though my experience of it was right here at home. It changed me. You know, the war changed me, and it changed me, and I want to have a conversation about that. So thank you for that question.
There's, the way that we as a culture imagine the war, and then the way that we understand the veterans of those wars, and then there's the individual experiences of the veterans themselves that are never going to match up with that.
Could share your thoughts and beliefs about what you think the barriers are to having the important conversations between veterans and civilians.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good question. I guess the first thing that comes to mind is fear. I feel like there's a fear that maybe exists on both sides. Certainly speaking as a civilian, I have a lot of family members and loved ones who've been to war and back, and I am afraid of, asking them to talk about things that are painful for them, or were scary, or were extreme. I'm afraid of bringing those experiences back to mind. I'm afraid it might upset them or upset me. And I think that I maybe err sometimes on the side of not talking about something because I don't want to get people upset, people I love very much. And so that can be maybe why I haven't always asked good, hard questions.
There's so much that we project onto the notion of military service. Vets are sometimes unwilling to talk about their experiences for a variety of reasons. And veterans can be just as guilty as civilians in making the conversation strained and difficult sometimes. But I talked earlier about the kind of public perception of war, and then the individual experience. I met a veteran of World War II a couple years ago, and I remember asking him what he thought of the greatest generation idea. And before I even got the question out, he was like, "It's bullshit. Tom Brokaw's bullshit," And then he was like, "Look, war ruined my life. I couldn't be with people for years after the war. I was a loner. It took me years to discover that the world is not just an ugly place." So if I was going to be a part of that, and hopefully a positive part, right? It wasn't up to me whether we were going to Iraq or not. That decision had already been made. I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in 2005. It was, what role can I play?
I'm a high school teacher of English, and I enjoyed both your books.
Thank you.
We had our students at Darien read Unbroken over the summer, one book, everyone read it, and we did have some parents call to say they thought it was a bad choice because it got very graphic. So much action. I mean, it did, but it but at the same time, you're talking about the importance of telling these stories and having these stories be heard. Any ideas about what do you say about the fact that, obviously it is wrong?
How old are these kids?
Well, 9 to 12th grade.
9 through 12. I mean, the thing is, you're talking about like a 12th grader, they can be experiencing that in a year. So,
And why is it more graphic than, for example, Anne Frank's diary, which has the graphicnesses of an emotional horror, which I think can be just as profoundly, affecting.
it's strange to me, there's so much violence in popular culture anyway, and yet it seems like people only really want to protect kids from it when it's like nuanced, intelligent, like thoughtful looks at violence. Like they can't experience that,
Right.
but
they can play a video game where they,
yeah, like Call of Duty or whatever. I don't know. I've never played that game, so I don't know what it is. Maybe it's great and thoughtful. But yeah, it seems like that kind of thing only happens when it's exactly the sort of stuff that would allow somebody to understand with greater context the depictions of violence that are all around us all the time.
Of course, because that's books that get banned are books that challenge us and provoke us and are
Right.
deeply, sort of skeptical of a lot of things we've assumed. So,
are you conscious as you're writing about, I'm telling my story, I got to get it out, this is what I saw, and this is sort of the vehicle that's going to, by which I'm going to say what I have to say, but also think there has to be something more that I want to bring out, something universal. Do you feel that as you go along, or do you let it come out organically, or I'm just curious how it becomes from the news to the literature that
well, I think I have an example in the novel. So the second half of the novel takes place at Walter Reed Army Hospital, as I said, and I was very much inspired by the series of amazing Washington Post articles that were written that exposed the housing scandal at Walter Reed before it closed. So Walter Reed is this unbelievable hospital where such great innovations were made and so many soldiers were saved with limb loss and other intense injuries that wouldn't have been saved before, that they created this other problem of so many people who had survived and yet who still needed this medical treatment. Where do we put all of them? How do we house them and their families? And that was the piece that they had a lot of problems with. And so this is a political issue, for example, as well as one that deeply affected a lot of people. And I wrote about it. And I remember thinking, I wonder if this part will be allowed to stay in the novel if it gets published, because it was very specific, about a specific place, about a specific situation. I was really happy that my editor felt like that was a really strong feature of the book, that it took something from the news and explored how people might have gone through that. I mean, that's a lot of times I think what I connect to as a fiction writer. I will read about something in the news, something that's political or in the culture, and I will want to imagine what it would have been like to be there or be a part of that. That's what I did when I wrote about Walter Reed. So to me it was a little bit of both, a little organic, wanting to just imagine this experience, and a little bit of really using a lot of great news and reporting that had come before I wrote the book.
I didn't think of it in that way. You're writing about human beings and the way that policies that are the result of political decisions affect them. I mean, it's sometimes when we talk about a political novel, like, are you writing about, like, I want somebody to take this political point. Like, I will read this novel and then vote Democrat for the rest of my life, which is not, that's, but like Middlemarch, right? The politics of Middlemarch are deeply important to all of us if you read that book, because they explain how humans, function in relation to those political decisions and maneuvering. And so, for me, it's just finding the human core of whatever experience you're trying to get at. I wasn't trying to do reporting, because they're great reporters doing that. I think what it is when you're writing, you're looking at what's out in the culture, or at least I am, and I'm like, what's missing? What do we need to talk about? What do I want to say? What is it that troubles me, that I can't even articulate yet until I write it into a story? And then by writing that story, invite other readers to come in and imagine that experience from the inside. You know, what's that? That's what I'm going for, the piece that's missing, and then, I don't know, that's all you can do.
Moving forward, do you have a book you're working on now, or is there a project in mind that we can look forward to?
I hope so, yes. I've been mostly, so excited to be going around and talking about this novel right now. And it's been so great to have that taking up all my time. And I think that, yes, after this quiets down a little, I want to go back into the world of writing a novel. I can't exactly, it's still all brewing, I would say. But yes, I love writing novels. I'm excited to get back and write another one.
Working on a novel. I learned recently about the box office success of 50 Shades of Grey, so working title is 50 Shades of Camouflage. But we'll see. I mean, I'm working on a novel in early stages, so it's kind of hard to say what it'll be. Thank you.
Thanks.
This is for each of you. I'd like you to picture the war memorials in D.C. in front of the Lincoln Memorial. We've got World War II, Korea, Vietnam. What should the war memorial to Iraq look like?
I'm going to let Phil take that.
Well, I don't know, is the easy answer, and the true one. God, I mean, we're still engaged. I mean, there's still people over there, advisors with the Army. We're doing it, we're basically still at war. We just don't really call it that. So, what should it look like? It should look unfinished.
True. I mean, it took me a long time to admit I wanted to be a writer. I think because I was just a reader for so long. And, I was really in love with books and fiction. I think I secretly wanted to write, but it was really tough to admit. And so I did a lot of things that were about writing, but weren't exactly writing. I think I was afraid to admit it to myself, because it mattered so much to me. So I was an editor for a little while. I went to graduate school to get a PhD in lit, and all that time I kind of circled closer and closer to writing, and when I did start, it was really in secret. It was a lot of short stories that I never showed anybody for years, until I felt ready to.
High school, I had a great teacher, and I think sometimes writing is taught, you read a story as if there's like a message to decode, which is of course not the point of the story at all. And we were reading Flannery O'Connor, Circle in the Fire, with a high school teacher of mine, Mr. Connolly. And we're kind of struggling with this weird O'Connor story, trying to pull out the themes and meanings. He says, all right, stop. It's not a riddle, it's a story. Let's talk about it as a story. Right. And that was such a valuable thing to be told, that if you can reduce the story to didactic lessons, it's probably a really bad story.
It's funny, we sometimes have to be reminded of that,
yeah.
Right? To enjoy it as a story, first and foremost.
Did you find it difficult going at first in Princeton?
Academic-wise, or I think so.
In terms of all of a sudden, you were an avid reader from the time you were,
Sure.
you know, loved books, you know, read everything. Now all of a sudden, it's a different story now. Now you're reading structure and
Right.
background, context, the canvas upon which these writers wrote.
You know, I got to tell you that I think I might be in the minority here, but deconstructing a book or doing whatever with it in terms of a lit theory way actually makes me love it even more. So I was not, maybe I'm just an English major at heart always, but it was not a problem for me to kind of take books apart and see how they worked. I loved that. I loved talking about them in any way. So luckily, I was able to hang on to the enjoyment of reading even while I worked at getting the degree, and I'm glad for that.
So I was with the 2nd Marine Logistics Group Forward in TQ in Anbar Province. So I spent most of my time in TQ. At some point I made my way out to pretty much every major base in Anbar, and I spent time with a lot of different types of units.
Right. So that's the, you saw what I call the canvas. You both wrote characters, you both created characters, and you put them in a canvas, a background story. Now, your characters, your two ladies, I assume you created them from scratch, or unless you knew women like that. Did you?
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. I think they, to me, aren't based on anybody I know in real life other than myself, because I think I gave both women ideas or observations or feelings that I've had at one time or another. But no, they weren't based on anybody in particular.
How did you get to understand what I call that big canvas, the frame?
The big
In
canvas.
which these women lived and acted or reacted.
Right.
Because that frame,
Right.
that background is the war.
Right.
How did you immerse yourself into that?
Right.
Not just through television.
No, well, I mean, I lived in that canvas for quite a while. So my brother, who was a Marine, was deployed in 2006, and he had gone to Afghanistan before then, and then to Iraq. So I was really familiar with life on the home front and what it felt like to be part of a family, working a job, and yet all the time thinking about someone over there and feeling this kind of continual pressure, continual sense of something missing. So when it came time to write the novel, I did use what I'd experienced, but I tried to think of how these characters, these other women, could walk around inside that canvas, what they might do or say. I let them make some scenes that I didn't make. I let them have some outbursts that I didn't have. And I tried to sort of use what I'd learned, but give it to people who were pretty different from me at times.
I saw the video of you of your going up to receive the National Book Award. You were nervous. I think you were surprised.
I was definitely surprised.
Did you have something written out? I think you did.
I did, because my wife told me to do it that day. She asked me if I'd written a speech, and I said, no, I'm not going to win. And she was like, you have to write a speech.
Smart, smart.
So
Smart lady.
that's why I had something. Yeah.
Can I just say that's so incredible. It's amazing. How has it changed?
It's been incredible. It's been fantastic.
Well,
yeah.
I was rooting for you online as it was unfolding. I was
Thank
watching
you.
live Twitter happen, and there were a lot of us cheering, on our couches when you won.
Thank you.
It's amazing.
When did you know you had a good book?
I don't know if I know that yet. But I think I know what you're asking, and to me, one of the secrets that I've had is I really need to be enjoying my book, and I really need to be interested in it, and so I feel like that's my true north. Is if I am excited to get up at 5:30 in the morning and go to my computer and work on it, if I'm interested in following the story, if it makes me laugh sometimes, then I feel like I'm on the right track.
Well, I turned the book in like January 2nd, 2013, and I think the edits were in February. So it was a quick
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 turnaround.
turnaround, yeah.
I assume you're told that you're a finalist.
Yeah, you're told that you're a finalist, and then you, for the National Book Award, and then there's a dinner, and you find out when they call your name.
Funny, is from my point of view, the difference between you're walking up and talking and Colum's walking up and talking. Colum looked like he knew he was going to get it. I swear to God he did. He looked like he knew he was going to get it. You didn't.
I definitely did not.
That's great. You guys want it?
I can't think of anything offhand. No, this was great.
Fantastic, yeah.
Yeah.